Worst records in MMA history. The greatest mixed martial artists in the world know that at any time they can taste defeat at the hands of a formidable foe. But sometimes one defeat is all it takes to set off a chain reaction of losses that can soon ruin a once great record. Join us in this video as we discuss 10 of the best fighters with the worst records in MMA history. Number 10. Kazushi Sakuraba. Kazushi Sakuraba is a Japanese fighter who spent the better part of 2 decades performing around the world for various promotions. He made his debut in 1996 and competed well into his 40s, helping lift the Japanese promotion Pride to unprecedented heights. Sakuraba is often referred to as the Gracie Hunter for notable wins over 4 members of the clan, including Renzo and Royce. Fans may remember his remarkable performance against Royce in Tokyo back in 2020. Rorion Gracie was forced to throw in the towel on his brother's behalf after 6 grueling 15-minute rounds. Throughout his long career, Sakuraba defeated over 15 world champions and 4 former UFC champions. The list includes Quentin Jackson, Vitor Belfort, and Carlos Newton. Unfortunately, fighting into your 40s generally doesn't end well. After going 2 for 7 in 9 fights, Kazushi Sakuraba finally decided to retire in 2015. Today, he has a record of 26 wins and 17 losses. Number 9. Robbie Lawler. Often considered one of the greatest performers the UFC has ever witnessed, Robbie Lawler first debuted for the promotion in 2002. He was unfortunately released not long after and had to work his way up through other promotions such as Pride, Elite XC, and Strikeforce before eventually returning to the UFC in 2013. During the following decade, Lawler would eventually shock the world by claiming the welterweight title at UFC 181. He defended it twice in hard-fought wars against Rory MacDonald and Carlos Condit before succumbing to Tyron Woodley at UFC 201. Unfortunately, Lawler would go 5 for 3 over the next 6 years and retired from the UFC in 2023 with a record of 30 wins and 16 losses. Number 8. Melvin Guillard. Born and raised in Louisiana, Melvin Guillard rose through the ranks of various small promotions in his home state before signing up to take part in the 2nd season of The Ultimate Fighter. While he didn't win the competition, he would go on to fight in the UFC for nearly a decade. During this time with the promotion, he earned 9 finishes by way of knockout. However, after going 2 for 6 from 2012 to 2014, he was eventually released from the UFC. He later joined Bellator before going on to fight in various other promotions, but he could never quite get back his former glory. Guillard won his first fight outside of the UFC when he met JC Cavalcante at WSOF 11. After this, he went on a 9-fight losing streak that ended with his retirement in 2019. By the time it was all said and done, the young assassin's once promising record sat at 32 wins and 22 losses. Number 6. Chris Lytle. The Indianapolis native Chris Lights Out Lytle made his professional MMA debut in 1999. He worked his way up through various smaller promotions, eventually earning a spot on the UFC 28 card against Mario Yamasaki. After the loss, however, we wouldn't see him fight for the promotion again for another 3 years until he returned to UFC 45 to face off against a young Robbie Lawler. Again, he lost, but would bounce back with 2 wins at UFC 47 and 49. A few years later, after bouncing between WEC and the UFC, Lytle found himself on the 4th season of The Ultimate Fighter. He made it right through to the final, only to lose to up-and-coming Matt Serra. But he had impressed the UFC enough to continue fighting for the promotion. Lytle showed promise, yet he struggled to win on a continuous basis. He was part of the American team on 2009's Ultimate Fighter and would go on to win the welterweight final by defeating Kelvin Burns. This led to his longest win streak in the UFC as he followed up his TUF victory with 3 wins. He would retire in 2011 after defeating Dan Hardy by way of submission at UFC Live 5 with a record of 31 wins and 18 losses. Number 5. Matt Brown. The immortal Matt Brown was once a favorite in the eyes of the sports fans and is regarded as one of the best welterweights to never become champion. After spending considerable time fighting on small promotions, he arrived on our screens during the 7th season of The Ultimate Fighter. He made it through a formidable lineup and defeated Matt Arroyo by way of TKO in the final. This was the beginning of his long UFC career. For 2 years, starting in 2012, Brown went on a 7-fight win streak, earning impressive victories over Chris Cope, Stephen Thompson, and Eric Silva. But just as he was on the verge of earning a title shot, his luck began to change. Brown would only earn 1 victory in his next 6 fights. For the past 6 years, we've seen him compete on and off, with his most recent fight taking place this past March. He dominated Court McGee, finishing him by way of a knockout in the first round. With this victory, Brown was then tied with Derek Lewis for most knockouts in UFC history until the Black Beast finished Marcos Rogerio de Lima in July. Today, Brown has a record of 24 wins and 19 losses, a record that doesn't necessarily show off the skills possessed by the veteran fighter. Number 4. Chael Sonnen. One of the most entertaining fighters in the history of the UFC is none other than Chael Sonnen. The bad guy is often credited with creating a form of trash talking that paved the way for fighters such as McGregor to gain millions of fans around the world. Sonnen first came to fight fans' attention when he faced off against Forrest Griffin back on IFC in 2003. He would fight on and off for the UFC and WEC in the following years before making the UFC his permanent home in 2009. After 3 impressive wins the following year, he narrowly lost his chance to become the middleweight champion by tapping to Anderson Silva in the 5th round. Chael went 3 for 3 over the next 2 years, losing 2 further title fights to Anderson Silva and John Jones. Eventually, he decided that becoming a UFC champion wasn't written in the stars, and he left the promotion in 2013. After his departure, he joined Bellator, where he earned impressive wins over an aging Wanderlei Silva and Rampage Jackson. But he went on to get knocked out by both Fedor Emelianenko and Lyoto Machida, which was enough for him to decide enough was enough. Sonnen retired with a professional record of 31 wins and 17 losses. Number 3. Nate Diaz. The Stockton native Nate Diaz has been loved by fans of the sport since day one. He came out victorious on the 5th season of The Ultimate Fighter and went on to fight for the promotion for 15 years. After 3 impressive wins over Takanori Gomi, Donald Cerrone, and Jim Miller, the Stockton native earned a shot at Benson Henderson's title in 2012. Unfortunately for Diaz, the champ would take home the victory by way of a unanimous decision. Over the next decade, Nate would show stints of his elite skills and would even give Conor McGregor his first loss in the UFC. However, the Stockton native would never get another chance at the title, leaving the promotion in 2022. As it stands today, Diaz has a record of 21 wins and 13 losses. Number 2. Randy Couture. The former Army sergeant turned professional mixed martial artist Randy Couture is considered one of the greatest athletes in the history of the UFC. He joined the promotion in the late 90s and would go on to dominate for over a decade. Couture would become a 3-time UFC heavyweight champion, a 2-time light heavyweight champion, and was the first fighter in the promotion's history to earn the title Champ. The elite wrestler competed in over 16 title fights during his time with the UFC. He defeated the best of the era, including Vitor Belfort, Chuck Liddell, and Tito Ortiz. Yet, for all his outstanding achievements, he retired with a record of 19 wins and 11 losses. It just goes to show that a clean record isn't always a clean indicator of just how good a fighter is in MMA. Number 1. BJ Penn. Our final addition to the list is often considered the greatest downfall in the history of MMA. BJ Penn made his UFC debut way back in 2001 and fought for the promotion on several occasions before trying out others such as K1. He returned to the UFC in 2006 and in the following year went on to coach the 5th season of The Ultimate Fighter. By the time Penn met Frankie Edgar at UFC 118, this would mark his 11th title fight in the UFC, an astonishing achievement. After losing by way of a unanimous decision, he would bounce back 3 months later by finishing Matt Hughes at UFC 123. Unfortunately for Penn, this would be his last ever win in the UFC. He would go on to draw with John Fitch in his next fight before going on a 7-fight losing streak that ultimately ended his career. By the time he was defeated by Clay Guida at UFC 237, his once promising record was now 16 wins and 14 losses. It was a heartbreaking end to such an impressive career. And that's our picks for some of the worst records in MMA history. Were you surprised by anyone on this list? And who do you think is the best fighter with the worst record in the MMA? Let us know what you think in the comments section below. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more like this, hit that subscribe button and follow along for weekly uploads. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time.